So I'd say there's definitely a lot of lessons to be learned from Pet Sematary. Don't fuck with fates, don't wake the dead, don't play God, and most importantly, when moving house, don't move to a house that's on a road where trucks pass through every fucking day at 100 fucking miles per hour. Hi, I'm Danny Quinn, and welcome to another episode of First Impressions. On today's episode, I take a trip to the Pet Sematary to see if it's worth seeing or if it came back wrong. The movie revolves around Lewis Creed, played by Jason Clarke, a doctor who relocates his family, including his wife Rachel, played by Amy Seimetz, his daughter Ellie, played by Jelly Lawrence, and his young son Gage, played by Hugo and Lucas Lavoie, to the town of Ludlow, Maine. The family befriends their neighbour Judd Crandall, played by John Lithgow, who shows them a mysterious pet cemetery in the woods near their home, and after burying their pet cat Church on an ancient Indian burial ground, they are stunned to find their cat brought back to life, but not quite as he first appeared. Stephen King's Pet Sematary was first published in 1983, and it is often considered by many to be one of his darkest works, not least by King himself, who is said to have had grave reservations about the book's content and thought it was far too cynical and downbeat to publish. And yet despite that, it is proven to be one of King's most endearing stories, and it has even been adapted in the past in 1989 with the film directed by Mary Lambert and written by King himself. And while I know that film does have its fans, I have to admit I'm not really the biggest fan of that version, to be honest. It's not really a classic Stephen King adaptation in the same vein as something like Carrie or The Shining or Misery, and it really has shown its age over the years, and it looks really cheesy and melodramatic, not helped by the really bad acting in places. It really reminds me a lot of the 1990 It miniseries in that it does have its charm and it is kind of cheesy in an enjoyable way in places, but it doesn't work quite as well since Pet Sematary is a very bleak story, and I think the campiness of the 1989 film just doesn't mesh well with the story, if I'm being honest. And considering how much I really enjoyed the 2017 It film, I had fairly high hopes for Pet Sematary, especially since we're in kind of a renaissance of great Stephen King adaptations in recent years, and there's still plenty to look forward to throughout the rest of the year, such as It Chapter 2 and the sequel to The Shining, The Book. I'm not sure if it's really a sequel to the film The Shining, but Dr. Sleep, it looks really promising. But getting back to Pet Sematary, the question still remains. Is it true that sometimes remade is better, or did this new version come back slightly wrong? The answer is mostly the former, but also a little bit of the latter. I think one of the things that really works about this version of Pet Sematary is its direction. Kevin Coates and Dennis Whitmire, who previously helmed Starry Eyes, really do a good job in creating a very moody and atmospheric tone that helps to set it apart from the 1989 version. It has a very somber and dreary look to it, and the titular Pet Sematary especially looks like something out of a Hammer horror movie or a Universal Monsters film from the 1930s or 40s. The film's visuals and production values are absolutely fantastic, which does put it above the 1989 film in my opinion, not least because that version really looked like a made-for-TV movie a lot of the time. The only thing that really kinda lets it down is that the film is a little too reliant on jump scares. I've said before, I don't necessarily mind jump scares, and most of the time they are fine, they're not that bad. But again, if you use them constantly, they do tend to get very lazy and very predictable. And that's kind of a shame because the gothic atmospheric vibe that this movie is going for really does work well. I'm a real sucker for a movie with good atmosphere, especially a horror movie. I think that does earn it a lot of brownie points for me. And the film does a good job in carrying over the story and themes of Pet Sematary, because regardless of whether you're watching the 2019 film or the 1989 one, the story that King tells is a very strong one. At its heart, it's very much a tale about mortality and grief, and that's largely embodied in the two leads. Lewis is haunted by his failure to save a student who died in a road accident, while Rachel is guilt-ridden by the traumatic death of her bedridden sister as a child. And they're both plagued by nightmarish visions of the people whose deaths they feel they inadvertently caused. And while I would say Zelda is largely very well realised, hell, I'd even go as far as to say she's even creepier in this version than she was in the 1989 film, I do kinda wish they'd done a little bit more with Victor Pascow, the road traffic accident victim who ends up haunting Lewis throughout much of the movie. Again, that was sort of one of the main strengths of the 1989 film, and they sort of used him as a form of almost like comic relief. It was kind of funny in a morbidly humorous kind of way. It's one of the few times where I'd say the more campy, cheesy tone of that film kind of works. Whereas in this version, he's just not given that much to do. All he really does is just warn Lewis about what he's doing. But another area where I'd say this version really runs rings around the 1989 film is in the performances. Jason Clarke does an excellent job in the lead role of Lewis Creed, a man who's pushed to make desperate and deeply questionable choices when tragedy strikes his family. He's really intense and unhinged, and I think he's a huge step up from Dale Midkiff, who played the part in the 1989 version. Likewise, Amy Seimetz, who's made a name for herself in several low-budget indie and horror films, but whom I personally most remember from her rather notorious encounter with a xenomorph in Alien Covenant, is absolutely fantastic in the role of Rachel. I also really like John Lithgow in the film as Judd Crandall. I thought he did an absolutely splendid job. But I think the real highlight is easily Jette Lawrence as Ellie. She's given a lot more to do in this version, and I can't really go into that because that is going into spoiler territory, but she's absolutely incredible. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think child performances in horror films always tend to be very good, and this movie is no exception. This movie doesn't really differ a ton from the 1989 film, aside from adding a much more atmospheric quality and downplaying certain aspects of the plot, such as Lewis's strained relationship with his in-laws. But the most drastic changes between the old film and the new film occur in its second half. I'm not going to say what happens since it technically is going into spoiler territory, despite the fact that Paramount, in their infinite wisdom, has pretty much given it away in their advertising for the film. And while I do largely like the film overall, I do think it begins to falter a bit in its third act. This is where I would say the most drastic changes between the book and the film occur, especially in its ending, which is changed up from the original film and the novel. And while the film's finale does offer some pretty entertaining highlights and some pretty suspenseful moments, it does end on a pretty underwhelming and weird note. And what doesn't exactly help is that it gets a little bit goofy in places, which really does stick out like a sore thumb whenever you consider just how seriously the movie takes itself. Overall, I would say this version is an improvement over the 1989 film, but that film did at least have a fairly satisfying climax. Whereas the finale here just largely feels kind of rushed. It doesn't really leave you feeling particularly satisfied with what happens. It makes sense in the context of the story they're trying to tell, I guess, but I don't know, I'm having some issues with it, I must admit. That coupled with some pretty clunky and heavy-handed instances of foreshadowing throughout the first half of the film means I can't really consider it a truly great Stephen King adaptation, just a fairly good one. It's a very tough and frustrating film for me to talk about because in a lot of ways it really works, but something about it just didn't fully win me over, unfortunately. Nevertheless, I still really like the film. I think it's well acted, it's well shot, it's very atmospheric and creepy, and while I wouldn't say it quite ranks as one of the best adaptations of Stephen King's work, it is a bit of a step up from the 1989 film. And while it's definitely not always the case, sometimes remade truly is better. I'm gonna give Pet Sematary a strong 7 out of 10. I'm aware that this film does have a fairly mixed reception from critics and audiences. Some people really like it, some people really don't like it, and I can understand both sides of the argument. It doesn't quite live up to its fullest potential, but in some respects, it does do a lot of things better than the 1989 film. And for the time being, I'm gonna say this is easily the definitive adaptation of Stephen King's novel. Would I recommend this film? Oh aye, absolutely. Even if it's not great, I still liked it a lot, and I think it's definitely worth seeing, especially in cinemas, and I definitely recommend this version over the 1989 film any day. So Pet Sematary, have you seen it yet? If so, what did you think of it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment, maybe subscribe to my channel while you're at it. If there's anything I can do to improve my presentation, do let me know. I'm always happy to hear feedback as long as it's somewhat constructive. If you want to follow me on social media or support me on Patreon or check out my website, links are below down in the description. And until next time, I'm Danny Quinn, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.